What happened at Dior Paris wasn't a headline, it was a quiet storm, and Meghan Markle was at the center of it. The Duchess, who the world watches at every step, walked into the city of fashion expecting glamour, only to find herself quietly blacklisted. No announcements, no arguments, just a cold, invisible line drawn in the marble halls of one of the world's most powerful fashion houses. How does someone so famous go from expectation to silent rejection in just a single visit? This isn't scandal. It's Paris doing what it does best, deciding who belongs and who doesn't. When Meghan Markle touched down in Paris, it wasn't just another celebrity visit. It was a statement. Her team called it a private fashion trip, a chance to reconnect with one of the world's most exclusive houses. But behind Dior's marble doors, the atmosphere had already been set long before she arrived. Staff were quietly briefed weeks earlier. No meetings, no fittings, no exceptions. Her name had been flagged quietly, internally. Walking through the grand halls of the flagship store, Meghan expected the usual elegance, the warm welcome reserved for royalty and celebrities. What she found instead was subtle, almost imperceptible. Cold formality. There was no fuss, no drama, just a polite silence. When she inquired about her appointment, the answer came back swift and final. Nothing was scheduled for her that day. No couture session, no collaboration meeting, no exception for the Duchess. It was a quiet rejection, but in the world of Parisian fashion, silence speaks louder than any headline. The marble corridors whispered the news before it ever reached the press. Inside the building, staff exchanged knowing glances. Editors, stylists, and influencers would soon hear about it, the story traveling faster than any official statement. Meghan's confident stride met invisible walls. For someone accustomed to attention, the cool formality was more than a minor inconvenience. It was a message, a reminder that in Paris, reputation and timing are everything. And even a global figure isn't automatically granted entry to the inner circle of couture. And while the cameras weren't capturing this moment yet, the Paris fashion world had already started talking. The whispers began quietly at first, subtle, almost secretive, but they spread like wildfire. What was supposed to be a simple, private visit had instantly become a lesson in influence, access, and the unspoken rules of the city that dictates global fashion. It wasn't for lack of effort. Meghan Markle's team had been working behind the scenes for months, drafting proposals that glittered with ambition, ambassador deals, multi-million-dollar collaborations, campaigns that reimagined Diana's elegance for a new generation. Every document, every presentation had been carefully crafted to signal influence, sophistication, and star power. But inside Dior, the reception was far colder than her team had anticipated. Executives flipped through the proposals with practiced neutrality, reading between the lines of ambition and subtle desperation. One insider allegedly remarked, "We dress legends. We don't create them from controversy." It wasn't a scandalous rebuke shouted across the office. It was quiet, polite, firm. A rejection delivered through formality rather than confrontation, but a rejection all the same. That morning, as Meghan arrived hoping to turn months of planning into opportunity, she faced a truth the fashion house had already decided on behind closed doors. Her proposals, no matter how ambitious or beautifully packaged, hadn't moved the needle. In the world of high couture, influence can't simply be bought or pitched. It must be earned. And in Dior's view, her reputation carried too much risk, too many headlines, and too little alignment with the legacy they sought to protect. By the end of the day, her name was quietly erased from contact lists. No dramatic announcements, no public statements, just silence. In Parisian fashion, silence is louder than any rejection letter. It spoke volumes to anyone watching the intricate dance of power, influence, and exclusivity within the city's most prestigious houses. Meghan's proposals weren't ignored. They were dismissed, delicately but decisively. A quiet signal that doors that day, and perhaps for months to come, would remain closed.
And while Meghan may have believed that a single morning could pivot her place in the fashion world, Dior's response was a reminder of something Paris never forgets. Ambition alone isn't enough. To step into the inner circle of couture, one must move with timing, authenticity, and the approval of those who define legacy.
Then the leaks began to surface. What had been private, behind-the-scenes communications suddenly found their way into the public eye. Emails, proposals, and pitch decks revealed months of meticulous outreach by Meghan's team, every idea carefully crafted to position her at the pinnacle of fashion influence. Among them was the final pitch, a campaign that subtly referenced Princess Diana's elegance, reimagined for a modern generation. It was ambitious, glossy, and as insiders would later say, the breaking point. Dior wasn't concerned with rejection itself. They were worried about the storm that might follow. Social media buzz, speculative headlines, and the risk of turning a couture brand into a stage for controversy were all red flags. The house didn't want drama, they wanted distance. And they made that clear in the most concise way possible. Across Europe, editors received a single, off-the-record statement. Dior has no current or planned partnership with the Duchess of Sussex. One line. No explanation, no backstory. Calm. Final. In Parisian fashion, brevity speaks louder than any press release. The silence that followed the statement was deafening to those watching. No invitations, no clarifications, no softening words. The message was unmistakable. The door had closed, quietly, but irrevocably. And as whispers spread through fashion corridors, from editors to stylists to insiders, the aura of Meghan's influence began to fade. The leaks had not only exposed the months of effort, but also illuminated a truth the fashion world already knew. Influence can't be forced. Even a duchess, even one with global fame, could not bend the rules of high couture. Dior's calm, concise statement wasn't just rejection, it was a lesson in subtle power. Distance in this world was far more meaningful than drama. By the time social media had begun to stir, Paris had already moved on. The house had drawn its line, and anyone paying attention knew exactly where Meghan Markle stood, admired from afar, but ultimately not welcome in the inner circle. The quiet rejection from Dior wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. Inside the walls of the LVMH empire, which oversees Dior, Givenchy, Fendi, and Louis Vuitton, Meghan Markle's name began to circulate on internal restricted lists. These lists are invisible to the public but carry enormous weight in the fashion world. They flag individuals considered too controversial, too unpredictable, or simply too risky for collaboration. Givenchy, which had once dressed Meghan for high-profile royal events, was among the first to step back. Chanel declined future pitches without explanation. Even stylists who had previously pulled luxury samples for her received subtle, discreet warnings. Avoid association. What had been polite rejection at one house had now rippled across multiple brands, creating a network of silent exclusion. It wasn't personal, it was protection. Paris fashion doesn't rely on public drama. It relies on whispered decisions and quiet signals. In this world, one misstep, or even the appearance of risk, can erase years of potential partnerships. Meghan, who had moved through social circles with confidence and charisma, suddenly found herself on the outside, her reputation deemed a liability. The power of these invisible blacklists cannot be understated. To be quietly marked in this way is to be barred from insider access, to lose the subtle approvals and favors that make the difference between being a fleeting celebrity and a respected figure in high couture. Editors who once flattered her began to keep their distance. Stylists who once offered advice now hesitated to engage. Influencers who had celebrated her outfits reconsidered their posts. In Paris, exclusion doesn't need a headline. Silence says more than outrage ever could. By the time whispers of Dior's decision had spread, the message was clear. Meghan Markle had become a risk that the fashion world was unwilling to take. And in this world, distance isn't punishment, it's authority.
Her journey through the epicenters of couture was no longer about admiration or influence. It was about navigating a network that quietly decides who belongs and who doesn't. And in that network, Meghan's name had been written off. Refusing to accept defeat, Meghan Markle made a surprise appearance at Balenciaga during Paris Fashion Week. The cameras clicked, the lights flashed, and for a fleeting moment, it seemed like her redemption arc had begun. Fans and photographers captured her elegance, her carefully curated look, and the aura of a woman determined to reclaim her place in fashion's inner circle. But behind the polished images, insiders describe a different reality. The energy in the room shifted the instant she walked in. Editors who once flattered her now kept their distance. Designers turned polite but cold. Stylists whispered among themselves, exchanging glances that spoke volumes. The applause that greeted her wasn't enthusiastic, it was polite, formal, almost obligatory. The cameras captured glamour, but backstage the story was unmistakable. Meghan had not returned to the inner circle. She had stepped onto the stage of observation and judgment. The room was filled with silent signals. Invitations to conversations never arrived. Compliments were withheld. Even casual greetings carried a subtle formality, a barrier invisible to the untrained eye but glaringly obvious to those in the fashion world. Every gesture, every look reminded her that influence isn't just about presence, it's about acceptance. To the public, the images suggested triumph. To insiders, the scene was awkward theater. Her walk down the runway, her carefully chosen ensemble, the poise that had once commanded admiration, all of it was met with controlled distance. The fashion elite did not need to make a scene. Paris had its own way of enforcing exclusion. Calm, invisible, and unmistakably effective. By the end of the event, it was clear. The cameras might have flashed, but the warmth had vanished. She was seen, admired superficially, but the true measure of influence, the backstage conversations, the insider nods, the casual approvals, remained out of reach. In the heart of Paris Fashion Week, Meghan was present, but she was not part of the world she had hoped to reclaim.
The cameras had flashed, the runway lights had dimmed, but Paris wasn't done judging. Behind the polite smiles and staged glamour, whispers began circulating, subtle yet unmistakable. Stylists and assistants exchanged comments that didn't concern her outfit, hair, or shoes. Instead, they talked about something far more intangible, the energy she brought into the room. One insider described it as heavy, suffocating, almost like an invisible weight pressing down on the space around her. And then came the moment that truly stirred controversy. After the show, Meghan was seen filming near the Pont Lama tunnel, the same location tied to Princess Diana's tragic passing. Her team insisted it was a scenic drive, but to Parisians and insiders, the choice of location felt deliberate, even provocative. For someone who had publicly drawn comparisons to Diana, it appeared to cross a line between homage and performance. Reactions backstage were immediate. A senior stylist who had once worked with Dior remarked quietly, "Diana's legacy belongs to memory, not marketing." The sentiment echoed through Paris fashion circles. Whether or not her intentions were genuine, the act was perceived as tone-deaf, even morbid. Social media buzzed with speculation, but in the true halls of couture, perception mattered more than the optics online. The incident amplified the existing undercurrent of distance she had already faced at Dior and Balenciaga. Editors who had once sought her for interviews now kept their distance. Stylists who had once ensured her outfits were flawless avoided her. Photographers who could shape public image subtly reframed their shots, capturing her, but not celebrating her. The focus wasn't on her clothing, it was on her presence. Paris, the city that had once embraced her poise, now measured her authenticity with cold precision. The Pont Lama tunnel drive didn't just raise eyebrows, it crystallized a perception. To insiders, it suggested performance over sincerity, ambition over respect, and calculation over connection. In a world where subtlety carries more weight than spectacle, Meghan's actions had spoken louder than any critique could.
By the end of Fashion Week, the murmurs had hardened into consensus. The Duchess had not only failed to reclaim her place, but had inadvertently deepened the distance between herself and the insiders she sought to impress. In Paris, whispers travel faster than headlines, and that week, every whisper told the same story. Presence alone is not power, and even royalty must navigate the unspoken rules carefully, or risk exclusion. The cameras captured Meghan Markle in her carefully curated Balenciaga ensemble, black pumps and all, and the public saw elegance, poise, and glamour. But behind the scenes, the story was different. The outfit wasn't gifted, it was borrowed. Every couture detail, every accessory that appeared to signal insider approval had been arranged through intermediaries, not the designers themselves. There were no personal fittings, no private adjustments, no attention from the house. In the world of high fashion, that distinction is everything. She wasn't a guest of honor, she was a guest of circumstance. Every gesture, every glance from the fashion elite subtly reinforced it. Editors who once sought her for interviews now avoided her. Stylists who had curated her looks kept their distance. Photographers who could dictate narrative with a single frame reframed her images to capture her presence without celebration. Every subtle cue told the same story. She belonged in the room, but not in the inner circle. Paris has a language beyond words. It speaks in subtlety. Through the warmth withheld, the casual greetings skipped, the invisible barriers in place. Meghan felt it instantly. The applause was polite, but devoid of the energy that accompanies true acceptance. Invitations for conversation, backstage access, or insider commentary never came. Even the simple approvals, the nods that silently confer legitimacy, were missing. This was more than social slight. It was a systemic signal. In couture, style alone cannot command influence. Presence alone cannot reclaim status. Even a global figure, even a duchess, is subject to the unspoken rules of the fashion hierarchy. To the insiders, her borrowed wardrobe and the calculated yet unacknowledged appearances highlighted a truth Paris respects above all. Authenticity cannot be borrowed, and admiration cannot be staged. By the end of the day, the lesson was clear. The images that flashed across social media suggested triumph, but behind the scenes, the reality was unmistakable. The doors that once might have opened for Meghan remained closed, and every action, every step confirmed that Paris does not reward imitation, it exposes it. In chasing influence, she had arrived at the edge of fashion's elite circle, visible but unclaimed. When Meghan Markle finally boarded her flight home, the cameras still flashed, capturing her poised smile, but the warmth behind those lenses was gone. Paris had made its judgment, quietly and unmistakably. The Dior incident was no longer just a single rejection. It reflected something deeper, the invisible rules of high couture, where influence, respect, and acceptance cannot be demanded, only earned. She had arrived believing that elegance and ambition could restore her place among fashion's elite. Instead, she discovered that style without authenticity is just costume, and borrowed influence cannot substitute for genuine respect. In chasing Diana's reflection, she had lost her own. The applause might have reached the public, but backstage, the silence spoke louder than any cheer. Paris doesn't boo, it doesn't yell, it simply withdraws. Editors who once admired her poise kept their distance. Stylists who curated her wardrobe withheld guidance. Designers who might have welcomed her influence looked past her, seeing a presence without authority, a performance without authenticity. And that brings us to the question: in the world of high fashion, do you think Meghan Markle can ever reclaim her place? Or has Paris already drawn the line? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more untold Hollywood stories.